trying to make textbooks cool again.
Eating subs in the back.
Okay, let's do it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Zoom Crew. And my name is Freddie Hernandez. You might know me as Tavarish. And I have lots of different cars that I sometimes work on, sometimes get my hands dirty. Today, I don't have my hands dirty because I'm joined by my friends. One friend is Charles, but you might know him as Humble Mechanic.
Hello.
Hi, Charles. How you doing?
Good. Thanks.
So, another one of my friends.
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. How are things?
Great. I just got AC in my shop, so I'm not as sweaty as I used to be, but still a little bit. So
I think Ben's taking up the reins on your sweatiness today.
Yeah, I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm in my house right now, but it's not technically insulated, this garage portion, so like I just get what bleeds over from the house.
Is that for
You
tax
parked your car in
purposes,
the
or-
that person that just talked right there was Mr. Ben Thorne from Gears and Gasoline. Now, I need to do a way better job at hosting this. This is my first time, if you can't tell. But we have Ben Thorne from Gears and Gasoline. He makes amazing videos about cars, about road trips, about race track stuff. And how you doing?
I'm doing great. I was actually just working on my Civic. It takes me a lot longer to work on cars than you guys because I'm not as talented, but I'm getting there.
Oh, is talent the word that you want to use for? Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so last but not least, my friend, Mr. Jason Fensky, you know him as Engineering Explained, and he explains things on a whiteboard for laymen like me and probably everybody else because he has a huge brain. His brain is just nuts.
It barely fits in that Miata that he's sitting in, I think.
So
Yes.
Here's the thing, Freddie. If you just stay inside, there's already AC, and you don't get sweaty because whiteboards don't require all that much work.
That's
Yeah,
that big brain. He's thinking.
I don't
Someone
know.
said talented earlier.
I don't know if it requires work because your brain has to work, right? I don't know half the things that you write on that whiteboard. So it's just gibberish to me. I never did well in school. So what you write is infinitely more work than working on cars in a hot garage or in a cold garage. So, I mean, hats off.
I'm trying to make textbooks cool again.
Were they ever cool? Like, was that ever a cool thing to have, or you're just trying to start the trend?
I think
from
it's
scratch?
a lost cause.
Keep fighting the good fight, brother.
Yeah. So we are here because Advanced Auto Parts recently acquired DieHard batteries. It's a really big brand. And we wanted to talk a little bit about our battery stories. I mean, we've been working on cars for quite a long time. We've had experiences with them. And batteries are very important to cars. You need them to drive. So I wanted to start off and ask the peanut gallery here, do you guys have any good battery stories just off the bat?
Ooh, doggy. So I'll jump in and hop in this one first. I have many wonderful battery stories. Everything from batteries exploding underneath the hood, which is a lot of carnage. What's even better is when you get a car come through the shop that the battery had exploded and then got replaced, and all that acid leaks down into the guts and the wiring, and the car's just trash. But and I'm going to tell you, Freddie, stop me because I will battery ramble for hours and hours, and you guys will fall asleep or whatever. But I think it's really underestimated just how important the vehicle battery is on a modern car. You take a car 60 years ago, yeah, you needed the battery. It had to turn the starter. It had to operate the radio and the little 12-volt outlet. I think they called them cigarette lighters back then. Today, we're asking so much of our car we want it to pair with our phone. We want it to have a garage door opener. We want it to have dynamic lighting and all this really cool stuff. And that really does cause a considerable drain on the battery and, the alternator to work harder too. My favorite story of really getting a car that had not a bad battery, just a low battery. Like you could test the battery would test good. The little paper said good. But this was like an 04 Touareg, and the guy would be driving it and lights would start flashing, all-wheel drive electronics freaking out, bings and boops and all kinds of things in the dash, and finally get the car, and it was about half a volt too low for the vehicle. So you'd pull a fault log and there would be like 10 faults in every system. And it ended up, thankfully, after like 3 battery replacements, because that's one thing you had to do, ended up being about a half a volt drop on the starting charging cable. So the system, the vehicle, instead of having, call it 14 volts, was running at 13.5 volts. More than enough for a car 5, 10, 12, 20 years ago, right? But this Touareg, oh man, this Touareg was not happy at all. And
So
it was
are you
awesome. It's
telling me-
probably one of the most productive jobs that I ever done, because I got paid a lot of money to pull an engine on a Touareg under warranty.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fun.
So you're telling me that a car is that has that little breathing room between 14 and 13.5 volts that it would start giving error messages?
Not all of them. Like, I'm pretty sure my Miata would run on 9 volts. Not a 9-volt battery, just 9 of a 12-volt system. But yeah, this Touareg, it had so much going on. It was asking for so much from the starting charging system, which is the batteries, one of the main components of that. Boy, it was just not happy.
See,
I think a Miata probably doesn't make enough power to charge a 9-volt battery. But speaking of Miata, Jason, what do you think? Do you have any good battery stories?
Here's another pro tip for everyone out there. The more recent the purchase date of your vehicle, the less fear you have about that battery going wrong. So I actually just looked at my Miata. It's a 2019 battery, and it's serving me well. I don't know if I've actually had battery-related failure. Certainly I've had batteries go bad, and it's like, okay, this one needs to be replaced, but never like a stranded kind of thing. In my Integra, the distributor failed. And so it was like, oh, did my battery just go bad? But no, it wasn't the battery, it was the distributor.
I actually remember when that happened and getting text messages about that a handful of years ago.
Yeah, my go-to is definitely like, when my car breaks, I just text Charles and say, it sounds like this, tell me what's up.
And he gets this.
That's like the one thing that'll go bad on a Honda is the distributor. You found the one weak point.
Have you experienced a similar scenario, Ben?
I know. I swapped the engine out before I had that issue. So, I mean, I've had no issues.
Ben goes all in hard. Forget the distributor. We're putting a new engine in it.
Yeah, it's too risky to run a stock engine. You want to swap to a different engine. That way the distributor's flawless.
That's right.
It doesn't have a distributor anymore.
Yeah, take it right out of the equation.
Yeah, so it's funny. Obviously my Honda Civic is super reliable, but I have an interesting story with my first car, a Ford Escort, that is not so reliable. And I actually had there's a voltage regulator on the alternator that had gone bad. And thankfully, because I was in high school at the time, I had all those little gauges lined up in the car all over the place. And of course, most of them were worthless, but one of them was a 12-volt gauge. You don't really need a 12-volt gauge there, but hey, I had it. And it's a good thing I did, because I saw it go up to 18 volts. And all sorts of stuff was going weird on the dash, and I was like, whoa! And later to find out that it's a voltage regulator. Yeah, kind of a weird quirk.
So it didn't give your Escort like more power? It just...
I was wondering why it felt a little bit quicker, yeah.
This car's so fast!
Hotter spark.
No, it's actually crazy how much is actually, dependent on the voltage system. I know injectors, the pulse width of an injector opens up differently depending on the voltage. So if you've got more voltage, like 18, I'm probably flowing a lot more fuel, and among many other things that were probably going wrong. So
you just found the secret to more power, dude. Don't say that out loud. You're gonna give it all the good secrets away. That, like, it is really a good point though. You have to be functioning in that range. You know, we think of a car battery, we think of electronics in a car as 12-volt systems. There's a lot of things that run on 5 volts. So if you're half a volt low, it's not as important when you're targeting 13 as when you're targeting 5, where you could, and this is one of the reasons that Touareg was freaking out so much. It was still functioning within its normal function range, except it was getting erroneous information between 2 systems, and just everybody shut down, and unhappy times. Freddie, I know you got a good battery story, because I can count 1, 2, 3. There's at least 3 cars I can see. Oh, there we go, 4. You have to have something good for us. Probably outweighs all of our cool stories.
No, not really. This is back when I was living with my parents in New Jersey, and this had actually nothing to do with the car, but I would have these, cheap, crappy cars, as opposed to now, where I also have cheap, crappy cars.
Expensive, crappy cars.
Jason,
crappy cars. That's right.
Jason, this is your first call with us. Freddie will flex several more times, but like in a humble way. But just so you can you can buckle up. You're already buckled up. You're ready to go for it.
I am buckled up. It feels dangerous to me.
I got to adjust my seat. I was sitting on my Aston Martin key. Sorry about that. So I was at my parents' house. And what I would do is I had these batteries that I would swap out from car to car, because batteries were expensive and I didn't have a lot of money. So I had one always on the battery charger. And I think I just left it there for way too long, and the battery charger wasn't that great that it would stop charging after a certain point. So one day I woke up and there was this god-awful smell coming from somewhere in the garage. It smelled like something died. And then we were looking around and we were like, what happened? Did like a squirrel just come into the garage and die? Like, we were going underneath the cabinets. We're like, it's just a crazy, like rotten egg smell. And we figured out that the battery had overcharged and it started giving off that sulfuric acid, that noxious smell. And it was
smell if you have never smelled that smell, you don't appreciate how awful, just unbearably awful that really is. Yeah. I'm like smelling it right now as you're talking about it.
Yeah, it's just a concentrated fart. Like that's all it is. That was the entire house, and I took the battery off the charger. I had to dispose of the battery, and I learned something that day, that you can't just have a battery charging on a really bad charger for 2 weeks or a month.
How mad were your parents about that?
So they weren't mad, because they didn't know where it was coming from. And by the time we figured out where it was coming from, it was more of a relief. So I saved the day.
What a spin. I love it.
Farting in this house and I can't figure out where it's coming from.
Well, good news, you don't have to call the plumber.
That's kind of an interesting problem, right? Because you say, okay, like it shouldn't be left on a tender for that long, but it's because of the tender, not because it was left that long. Because if you're going to leave a battery, like often people say, like, oh, you should keep it on a tender so that it's charged and ready to go once you actually start, rather than just letting it sit there and die completely.
Of course.
Yeah.
So most tenders or maintainers, they have specific programs, so they know when a battery gets to a certain level, and then they kind of just top it off every once in a while. So they don't just keep adding and adding and adding, and then just
you just had 2 wires going straight to your outlet, and connect the battery together.
Okay, let's do this.
Yeah, I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to battery care. I just kind of leave them in the car and let them sit. And I've had many batteries die. Thankfully, most of my cars are manual, and I just kind of roll start them. I've roll started cars all sorts of places. And that's due to my own ignorance, because I need to get some battery tenders.
Yeah, man. Once you have a maintainer, I actually need to buy a couple more maintainers, because I only have one now. So it's on like a vehicle rotation of the maintainer. And man, it's game changer to just hit the key and start the car up. I will say though, we're building the garage. I had one of my cars parked at the neighbor's house on a pretty steep incline, and the battery was dead. So it was a 6-speed. I pop started it. Man, you would think that I just cured cancer or something with how excited people were about it. I'm like, I just jumped, pop started. Oh my gosh, you can do that! I'm like, yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome. Freddie, have you ever been stranded? Whisperer. Have you ever been stranded, Freddie, with a dead battery?
Yes. So I drove. Actually, one of the cars, you probably can't see it back there. So it's a 1998 Lexus LS400, and it used to belong to Matt Farah, and it was the million mile Lexus. So it has 1 million miles on it. And one of the first things that I did with the car when I'll give a preface to what this car actually is. Matt Farah, this internet personality, really big in the car world, he buys this Lexus LS400 that he gets on Craigslist for about I don't know, like $2,500, and it has 900,000 miles. And he wanted to get it to 1 million. He thought it would be a really cool story. So what he did was, since he's not going to put 100,000 miles on it in short order, he just gave it out to people. And I was one of the first people that he gave it out to, and I drove across the country in it. Now, this is a car with 900,000 miles. It has a lot of issues. Everything becomes a wear item. So me and my wife, we went to, I think we were somewhere in Arizona. It was super, super hot. And we were going over an overpass, and for some reason, the car just died. It just absolutely died. Nothing, no crank, all the lights just died. And I'm like, that's weird, because I checked the charging system before I left. Alternator was going, and it turned out that battery was just it was taking a charge, but if I turned on the AC, if I turned on the radio, and if the blower's going and the music's going, the battery would not hold that charge. So I found that out right in the middle of 105-degree middle of the day, and I'm on the highway. So that was pretty interesting.
That is, so I haven't I lean towards experiments rather than these fun stories, but I did do a fun experiment where I feel like people often say you don't want your battery to fail because it can also ruin your alternator. And so in that scenario which you're describing, Freddie, where the battery the alternator can't keep up with the drain on that battery. So I did an experiment where it was is this something that'll really happen? And I looked at voltage going into the alternator and then the alternator temperature as a result of having a dead battery and driving around or having a fresh battery and driving around. And it was a significant temperature difference and current draw that alternator saw with the dead battery. So I think the peak temperature difference, the alternator with the fresh battery was floating at 30 degrees C, and the alternator with the dead battery was at 45 degrees C.
Oh, wow.
So significantly hotter, and the demand was much higher. But certainly in a scenario like you're describing, that alternator has to work so much more depending on what it's doing, what you're powering. And as Charles was mentioning earlier, there's so many more devices that are now reliant on that battery. So yeah, it plays a big role on your alternator when the battery is not kept at its ideal state of charge.
I think Freddie forgot to mention too that he had 7 GPSs, his laptop, a mini fridge, all plugged into the car too. So, and a window air conditioning unit because you're in Arizona.
15-inch subs in the back.
40-inch flat screen.
I just brought all my house speakers along too.
This was the minivan, wasn't it? It was the pink and purple minivan.
Yes. It was the Pimp My Ride minivan.
Yeah, what does the battery and alternator system look like on that minivan?
Funny you should ask. Actually, it had a really big alternator, and it had 2 batteries. So it had one in the back. I actually replaced them with AGM ones from Advance. And it had one regular car battery to do all the car stuff, and then it had this big switch that was it's just like this giant relay, and then it had a big one, a big battery right behind the wraparound couch thing, which I found out when I started taking stuff apart, and I'm like, hey, there's a really big, heavy, dead battery back here. So that was cool.
It's basically a Tesla. You got batteries everywhere.
It's exactly a Tesla. That's what I keep on telling everybody. But so you said that you have a bunch of dead batteries from your cars, not maintaining them, Ben. Do you have any stories where you've been left stranded?
Honestly, I don't think I've ever been left stranded because, again, most of my cars are manual. But I've had issues where, trying to find hills and getting people to help push start them, and it's quite frustrating. And back in my high school days when I did have, big subwoofers in the back, I run the big 3 upgrade with the bigger diameter ground and strap and stuff like that from the alternator to kind of help the battery along. But it actually never fully drained on me, to my surprise. I guess I didn't have a big enough sound system. I wasn't quite there.
Time to upgrade.